Okay, I'm back from being distracted. Anyways, okay, so these are the classic Victorian women. And this takes us to the next concept of Victorian morality, which is going to be temperance, this concept that we're going to limit alcohol consumption and control how much alcohol has an impact on society. Um, this is to restrict the sale or use of alcohol. And Women's Christian Temperance Union is the big leader in this, and they're active all the way into prohibition. In fact, they use the temperance as a reason to give women the vote. And they want to protect families of all classes from drunken husbands, particularly the working class, though, because they look at the social problems of kids in the street and crime and, poor sanitation and lack of education. They look at those things and they say, well, it's because the men are drinking. And so they think that makes sense. But kind of one of the side effects of the Women's Christian Temperance Union is they begin to challenge the control of the political bosses, because they look at the political bosses and how they're controlling their communities and how they're forcing them into these clubs and all this kind of stuff. And they see them as kind of temperance and political corruption as going hand in hand. And so temperance will push women even farther into the reform movement. So we'll see this real irony of women being much more politically active and aware of what's going on. Yes, ma'am? Not today, tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay. And so so this is kind of how women get involved into politics. And so this kind of idea that women are more moral than men is part of what justifies our political involvement, even though at the same time the concept of politics as being dirty and beneath women presents a real irony. We also see public education. Good workers know how to read, write, and count. This is where we have a lengthening school year. We have public funding for schools. We have this whole idea of conformity, which becomes a key component of education, which is one thing I think you can see as a difference in modern education. We still have a high degree of conformity, but there is more emphasis on creativity and individuality in schools these days as compared to what existed in 1910. Black Americans suffer from a lack of educational resources. A lot less money is spent to educate blacks. Unless you're one of those few that's allowed to be in the middle class, or you happen to be in a really vibrant black community like, say, Atlanta. It's a way to Americanize immigrants, much like we tried to Americanize Native Americans. And a lot of immigrant parents, like the Native American parents, will think that education is the way to get their kids out of the tenements. So the idea of kindergartens, normal schools, women begin to receive an education because the idea of Victorianism and that women have to lead their families means that a woman should be more educated, certainly if she's middle class or wealthy. And if you're working class, you need to be able to read and write if you're going to contribute to your family's income. For women, this becomes much more of education becomes broader across social classes and across distinctions. And I think I've mentioned this already, talking about the land grant schools and this idea of industrialization and professionals being needed and all that kind of stuff. And so you kind of have this trend towards higher education, and note that it does enhance the middle class. It also helps create this group of women that become very politically active, because these colleges, these women that go to school in the 1890s, they're not satisfied with just going home and educating their kids, right? They want to make a difference in the world around them. So you begin to see women becoming much more politically active. And you see this as well with the black community. So these groups that have access to higher education, while it's expanding the middle class, it also begins to create very reform-minded and open-minded individuals. Materialism, the middle and professional class have a lot more money to spend. They're the ones that consume the products primarily. Middle class especially want the trappings of wealth. And so we begin to have mass consumption with standardized styles and sizes. You begin to have department stores, catalogs. Products become available everywhere because of transportation and catalog systems and communication systems. You can place an order in a Sears catalog from, Iowa, and you'll get it in a few weeks. Layaway becomes a viable option. This is kind of the first step. When you make a lot of product, you have to have a way for people to buy stuff. Well, if your product is kind of expensive, you need to find a way to break that down into payments. And the first kind of creation of this is going to be layaway, where they set aside the product and you make payments, and then once you've paid it off, it's yours. What we'll see in the 1920s, when we have the next burst of materialism, is we'll have the establishment of consumer credit, where you get it first and then you pay it off. But layaway happened earlier. This is a picture of the Sears and Roebuck catalog, where you could order pretty much just about everything. Other major cultural developments, improved standard of living means that there's more money for entertainment if you're in the middle class or the wealthy. So you're going to have the emergence of saloons, amusement parks, sports, vaudeville, ragtime music. Ragtime music in particular was very powerful. Here's a painting of Coney Island, people going to the beach. Baseball, golf, there's kind of an early saloon. You begin to have realistic art and literature. People like Mark Twain become very popular, Edith Wharton's Age of Innocence, that create American characters with American subject matter. So this really begins, as far as art and literature, to be that break from Europe that we hadn't really seen before. The United States was not the only country undergoing massive immigration and industrialization. It was happening all over the world. And so global society was impacted just as much as the United States. We were not alone in this. But we do have some unique American issues with politics and with kind of our attitude towards business that I think that you don't quite have in other places, certainly with the attitudes towards unions. And we begin to see that urbanization and industrialization affect how America sees itself politically and how it sees itself in the world, because we'll go from this from really this stage of development into imperialism and into an engagement with the greater world around us. Once we kind of reach that coast-to-coast mentality, and there's really nowhere else for us to go. Remember, we like the frontier, so we'll start looking for a frontier when we get to the end of industrialization, if for no other reason than to have a new understanding of who we are and what we're trying to do in the world, and we'll just see a whole big change.